Good evening. This is Heartstock Radio. I'm your host, Carol Murphy. Thanks so much for joining us and wishing everyone happy holidays. Hope your life is filled with some cheer. We could all use some of that these kind of unpredictable times. I'm Carol Murphy, your host, and Daniel Hogan is in the studio. Today, our guest is Erinch Sahan, and he's with Doughnut Economics Action Lab. I can't wait to hear from Erinch and what they're up to there. I love the name. If you'd like to contact us, you can get a hold of us at heartstockradio@gmail.com. This is Heartstock. In just a moment, we'll be back with Erinch Sahan.
I saw below me that golden valley. This way was made for you and me. I roam and ramble, and I follow my footsteps.
Welcome, and thanks for tuning in and listening. This is Heartstock Radio. Today, our guest is Erinch Sahan of Doughnut Economics Action Lab. Hi, Erinch.
Hello, Carol. Wonderful to join you.
And you're speaking with us from the UK, is that right?
Yes, I'm currently sitting under some grey clouds in Oxford in England.
It's snowing here, or at least we did get some fluffy white stuff last night. And that makes us pretty excited, considering it's Christmas in Montana. Just wondering, what is Doughnut Economics Action Lab? And what kind of exciting stuff are you doing there? It sounds fun.
Yeah, it is, and hopefully it makes sense as I explain this to your listeners, Carol. But essentially, what we're doing is working with others to try to transform our economies to meet the needs of all the people on our planet within the boundaries of our living planet. And to do this, basically, we thought, well, there's a new way of thinking about economics, and it comes from the book of Kate Raworth, who is the co-founder of Doughnut Economics Action Lab, and author and researcher and economist, who thought of Doughnut economics as a compass for human prosperity for the 21st century. And essentially, it consists of two concentric rings. So a social foundation, which is to ensure that no one is left behind on life's essentials, and an ecological ceiling to ensure that humanity does not collectively overshoot the planetary boundaries that protect Earth's life supporting systems. So between these two concentric circles, the planetary boundaries on the outside and the social foundations on the inside, between these two boundaries lies a donut-shaped space that is both ecologically safe and socially just. And that's where the donut is. That's where Doughnut Economics is trying to shift our economics, our societies, and our ways of doing business into that reality.
And how did you become involved with Doughnut Economics, and what led you to take this on? I mean, this is no small undertaking, but very, very important in our times. How'd you get involved?
Yeah, I mean, Doughnut Economics has been on my radar for the best part of 10 years now. I worked with Kate Raworth, who's the author of the book and the co-founder, when we were both at the international NGO Oxfam, and we worked in various sort of economic and business spheres over 10 years ago there together. And since, I've done a few other things trying to transform business, worked at the World Fair Trade Organization as the chief executive, and have started various initiatives at Oxfam. But all along, I kept in touch with Doughnut Economics and the direction it was going in. And what I saw is that, pardon the pun, that it's a sticky concept. Donuts are sticky. People remember that. People remember the concentric circles. They remember the sort of obvious yet profound nature of framing the world and our economic future in that way, of thinking about planetary boundaries and the social foundations in that way, in a visualized way. And I saw that it was really taking off. And what we've seen is, everywhere from, the Kingdom of Bhutan to the Pope to, various UN agencies and the cities and mayors have taken to this as a little bit of a framework, a compass for human prosperity that can be the foundations of their future, of the way they plan their future and the vision for the kind of economy they're trying to create. So when looked at it through that lens, what we saw is that it was really reaching decision makers, but also reaching a new generation of economists, of citizens, of activists that were seeing the need for a much more holistic way to transform our economies. And for a long time, the question's been around, what does this mean for business? How does business need to transform to realize a world where, we meet the needs of everybody within the means of our living planet? And the more loud that question got in my head, the more I realized I've got to go over and figure this out. I need to work with Kate and her team at the Action Lab to figure out, what do we do with business? Because the vast majority of our economies are populated by business activities and business decisions. And unless we transform that into the right direction of travel, a lot of the rest won't move to where we need it to go.
Mm-hmm. Was there an event in your life or something that brought this into your mind? What was the impetus in your life for this line of work?
Yeah, I think it's been brewing for a long time. I come from a family of farmers, smallholder farmers in Turkey. My grandfather, my grandparents, my father's side, barely knew how to read and write. They were, living in a very self-subsistence way in Turkey, where I'm originally from, and I saw a lot of that in my family. I saw a lot of that in my heritage. That the economy isn't quite right. It is leaving a lot of people behind, and the promise of what the economics hasn't qualized in the way it needed to. And over time, I worked in business for a long time, and I worked in law for a little bit, and I was sort of in and around the business world with various capacities. Something just didn't seem right. And it was back in 2008 that I was working at Procter & Gamble, one of the largest companies in the world, working in one of the big brand teams there. And I decided to use my annual leave, my 2 years worth of annual leave that had built up to go to Africa, to go to Ghana and live and work with Liberian refugees. And I just felt like I need to question what I was doing, what I could do differently. And living and working with Liberian refugees who'd been there for so long, had been stuck in this very difficult situation, I started feeling more useful. I worked on microfinance. I worked as a teacher in the local school, supported various sort of NGOs and organizations that were in and around the refugee camp. And I realized, actually, this is the direction of travel I need to go. I need to think about how I can have a more direct impact on people's lives around the world. And based on that, I ended up moving into the aid and development sphere, which quickly threw up the question of, what's the role of business if we're going to make sure people can rise out of poverty and they can live dignified lives? And that question stuck with me. And as this 21st century has rolled on, the last 10, 12 years, the ecological concerns have become bigger and bigger and bigger, and that sort of come into my reality as well, working on very entrenched poverty for over a decade, but also working on issues of ecological concern has naturally kind of brought me to a perspective of, right, how do we get inside the donut, and what does business look like in that reality?
And how long were you in Ghana for total, and why were there so many Liberian refugees there?
Yeah, it was quite a short stint. It was just over a month. But what I noticed when I was there was that people had fled the Liberian
conflict over a decade ago. I think there were about 40,000 refugees from Liberia living in Ghana at the time, and they were a bit stuck because a lot of them would feel like they would be persecuted if they were to go back. It was quite a horrendous and brutal civil war that they had escaped, and a lot of them had been, driven out by, very hostile, violent, forces from all sides of that conflict. And for one reason or another, they didn't feel safe to leave the refugee camp. Yet they couldn't settle as well because they had status of refugees, so they were meant to be temporary. They were sort of in this no man's land in terms of their life and their future, and not feeling like they could really plan longer term. So they were subsisting, they were treading water in Ghana in that refugee camp. And it was very difficult because a lot of the interventions, the microfinance initiative or the work we're doing with the children to try to help them get an education, it was uncertain how long-term you could think about this stuff. Can those children go to university if they were particularly gifted and were able to sit Ghanaian exams? Could the, microfinance initiative support businesses that could be there for longer term and create the livelihood and benefits in those communities? Or is this all going to get wrapped up? Is this refugee camp going to be closed next year or the following year? So there was this constant threat of lack of clarity about the long term, and that really sort of, I think, brought home the reality of how precarious the world is for so many. And there are so many factors that operate there. But certainly the role of business and economics is profound in helping people like that live dignified lives.
Yeah, it seems like two oppositional simultaneous forces at play here. The realities kind of showing all of us on planet Earth that we are connected, in the well-being of everyone affects everyone. Underneath this backdrop of more and more them against us mindsets, and certainly civil wars affecting the well-being of us all, how does Doughnut Economics offer a solution for the huge challenges that we're faced with?
Yeah, it has various takes on it. Firstly, I think it reminds us that our planet has boundaries, that we've created economies that are in overshoot of those boundaries, that we are overusing, the land, we're over polluting the air, we're having an immense impact on biodiversity and on our soils and on our oceans. And there are limits to what this planet can take in terms of that kind of activity, much of which is economic activity. And it also reminds us of a second thing, which is that we are all equal, and we all on this earth have a right to the resources and the possibilities that our amazing living planet provides us. And when we take those two principles into account, that, look, we're all equal, we have the same right to everything, and we are all part of a system that is also pushing beyond the boundaries of our planet, then it creates a very different paradigm for what our goals should be on this. And it has huge implications, including, why do we have this goal of endless GDP growth? For instance, surely it's about human thriving, it's about human flourishing, it's about how we're able to live in balance with our earth, so that we can continue to take lives on it that are thriving well into the future. So, yeah, overall, I think what it does is it reminds us of that bigger picture goal that's quite difficult to disagree with. Of course, our planet does have limits. And of course, if person A is using way too much of our ability to emit carbon, or way too much of the soil or other things, and other people, as a result, have much less of an ability to do that, then that's a problem. Then that's something that needs to be addressed. And I think it throws up really big questions about the way we remake our economies for the 21st century and for the challenges of the 21st century in a way that brings more people along with it, because it's based on statements of fact as the beginning point, and statements of fact that are pretty hard to refute.
We're going to take our midway point break, and in just a moment, we will be right back and dig into the nuts and bolts, so to speak, more on Doughnut Economics. This is Heartstock. I'm your host, Carol Murphy. We'll be right back. This is Heartstock Radio. I'm your host, Carol Murphy, and today we are speaking with Erinch, Sahan, talking about Doughnut Economics. You mentioned, Erinch, that we need to bring more of the planet's population along with us. How does Doughnut Economics suggest that we can do that?
Well, I mean, firstly, we try to join the movement rather than be the movement. So there are so many movements, so many grassroots attempts, initiatives to try to make our economies function better for both us as humans as well as a planet that we rely on. So I think first is we don't need necessarily a meta movement that is hierarchical, but instead we have this decentralized approach where we create tools, we create openings and communities. For instance, on our website, doughuteconomics.org, people are joining to share information, and it's all free for people to create tools, to create learnings, to share insights, to support each other around the world. The second thing is a lot of the action is happening at a local level, Carol, which is really heartening because everything from national donuts and national attempts to try to change and improve policies and mobilize people to try to be a voice for that change. It's also happening at city level. It's happening in towns. It's also happening at neighborhood level. In places like in Birmingham, in the UK, there are attempts for neighborhoods to get together to map out what their impact is within that donut and how they as a neighborhood can take action and can take steps. So it's trying to do two very important things at the same time. It's trying to give very local, pragmatic, real life things that people can do, as well as keeping that goal of the bigger picture and keeping the reality of the bigger picture going, not blurring it, not saying, look, that challenge of climate change is too big for us to do anything about, so let's just switch our lights off a little bit more here and there. It's not saying that. It's saying, actually, our actions at a local level also need to be proportionate to the challenge of the global. And those two conversations happening in unison is something I think refreshing and real that people are tapping into. And as a result, it's just happening in a very organic way everywhere from, Melbourne and across Latin America to in Canada and the US to across Europe, and cities like Amsterdam and Copenhagen and Berlin have taken on the donut as a central organizing principle among many groups that are working there. And of course, in the UK and in South Africa, it sparks something. People are reading the book, Doughnut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist, and they're being inspired by it, and they're taking action locally. It's not prescriptive. We don't tell them to do A or B. What we try to do as an action lab is to create tools, to create stories, to create connections, to try to just spark and catalyze things and give a little leg up here and there where possible, but mostly to try to make these ideas open and accessible to the extent possible.
Can you maybe give us some examples of success stories, things that folks are doing on a local level that contribute to this global transformation of business?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what I've talked about so far has been at a more general level about what's going on in terms of economics and the way that this new economic paradigm and a concept, a compass for human prosperity is being promoted and spread around the world. But in terms of the business world, which is the area that I work on, it's a very new area for us that we're opening up at the moment, where we're working with various pioneering businesses to figure out what that transformation, that design transformation of business needs to be in. And this is actually a little bit of a new perspective, because for so long the business world has wanted to do just immediate things like the current business world. It is what it is. Let's see how we become less bad, how we reduce our impact a little bit.
Yeah.
And now I think what we're trying to spark is a conversation around the very design of business. How do we make the business world itself structured in a way that is as regenerative and distributive as possible. And that's a very new conversation. So how do we set up boards? How do we set up ownership? How do we set up financing of businesses? So all of those are pushing in towards the direction of creating the businesses we need that are regenerative and distributive. And those two words, regenerative and distributive, are probably worth unpacking at some point as well, because they're very central to that vision.
Indeed. And, does the current paradigm or design when it comes to, say, B corporations or social entrepreneurship, just kind of shifting the focus slightly from solely looking at profits to benefit, is that sufficient, or is it more involved than that? I mean, this is, like you said, we need some unpacking here. How do we do this, for goodness sakes?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these concepts have taken important steps to open up the possibilities of what business can be. Social enterprise, the cooperative model goes back centuries. We've got various modes of social enterprise. More recently, the B Corp movements also try to take a bit more of a balanced approach. And among those communities, there are some amazing businesses and individuals that are pioneering the kind of things we need. There are some B Corps that are absolutely, getting it right. There are many cooperative social enterprises, etc., that are doing this. But I think what we're trying to get to is a point where we're more deliberate about opening this up as an area of innovation, of saying, well, actually, guys, a lot of this is happening through, certifications and product labels and PR, etc., which means that the concepts that are coming out have an interest to promote themselves. And that's fantastic. That's absolutely necessary. But separately to that, we also need to sort of raise our game across the board and also build more diversity around what's possible, build more diversity around the kinds of business models that we might need to create that maybe haven't been invented yet, that aren't even, thought of by any of those movements or ideas yet. And that's going to require a lot bigger thinking that is maybe trying to bring some of those concepts together, trying to bring some big minds together, but also being bold enough to say we probably haven't got what's needed yet. I mean, we don't know, how do we represent Mother Nature in a business? It can't sit in the board. Who is the rightful representative of ecological and planetary boundaries within a company? How do we make sure that profits are reinvested in a way that is creating as much benefit as possible for the people that are impacted and for our planet? All of these, they haven't quite been cracked by any of the models that I've mentioned so far. So, but what we are seeing is individual businesses doing it. We don't have that meta framework that creates it yet, or is sparking the great innovations that are needed yet. So I think there is hope, and I think what those movements have done have opened up the realm of going beyond just making more money is the only real reason business exists. And I think that's what gives us hope that we can do more, that in a more innovative and a broader way than even currently is done.
In that model of profits being the sole purpose of business, it's hard to rip that from the hands of those clutching onto it with all their might.
Yeah.
Any suggestions as to how we as individuals, working locally, because it sounds like that's your model, that we're going to create global change by changing what we do locally. How can we change the minds of those who seem to be very, very determined to hold on to this model, the old model of business?
Well, I think one thing we need to get better at is all of those involved in trying to create the alternative, trying to create the models of the future, is to talk about the structural design, organizational design aspects of our businesses. Talk about its relationship to money and to finance, and how it is different than the mainstream model, where an investor might come in and expect huge returns as quickly as possible, which massively limits the ability of the business to for instance, it reinvests into its social and ecological benefits, or to just move in a direction that is part of the founder's vision, for instance. Talk about that. Like, what, it's so difficult to even unpack some of these things, even with the big, successful businesses that can roll off the tip of our tongues. What's its relationship to finance? What's its ownership model? Who owns it in what way? And how is the ownership structured to actually act to reinforce those social and ecological goals? Is it owned in a way where shares have got different classes, and the purpose share, for instance, that's held by certain individuals or foundations that keep the business on track? Is it owned in a way like the exit to community people are doing? It's an amazing community linked to Zebras Unite that is looking at different ways of converting businesses into community ownership. Is it owned in a worker-owned way? Is it owned in some sort of a hybrid of all these different models that are out there? Talk about what happens to the profits. Talk about what happens in the boardroom. Who has a seat? Who doesn't have a seat? And be honest about what are the changes that those businesses might want to try to instill. Because until we make this conversation truly about the structural transformations necessary in business, we're going to just tread water and make very incremental small changes within the realm of what's currently possible in the business world. So we need all of those models to be much more loud and proud about the fact that, look, I've set this thing up to have a very different structure of power, to channel the money differently, to have a different relationship with finance, to have a different kind of boardroom, to have different purpose altogether that is not just something that's wordsmithed on a page, but something that truly is into the structures of the business. And I've networked it in a way where it's locked in. I've locked all this great stuff in. It doesn't rely on the benevolence of the owner that can make it a B Corp one year or not one the following year. It doesn't require me to have dominance of a board and to bring my own personal ethics into every decision. But actually, all those considerations are now part of the business. They're organically living and breathing in that business. And there are so many examples. I mean, from El Puente in Germany to Menoso, Uruguay, and to, the collective Jackson in the US, where amazing cooperatives are happening, to Bronx and other places in the US where there's all sorts of worker ownership conversions going on. There's a lot of this stuff going on, but it's the structural bits that is where the conversation needs to go.
And how might our listeners find you?
Doughuteconomics.org is our website. So it's spelt in the British way, DOUGHNUT, economics.org. And they could see all sorts of things in there, including how to join the platform, the community, and all the tools that are available on there as well.
Thank you, Erinch, so much for being on Heartstock and the work that you're doing. This is huge undertaking. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Carol. It was a pleasure.
And this is Heartstock. I'm your host, Carol Murphy. We shall be back next week. We'll see you then. Peace.
A voice was sounding. This land was
Heartstock Radio is a production of KBMF 102.5 Butte America Radio. Hear our programs every Friday at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time via livestream at butteamericaradio.org.
The voice was chanting as the fog was lifting. This land was with you and me. As I went walking, I saw a sign there, and on the sign it said, "No trespassing." But on the other side